Welcome to Decode Crime Files. Today we're covering a famous unsolved case that happened in Singapore. Since gaining independence from Malaysia in 1965, Singapore experienced rapid economic growth under the leadership of Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. It has well-developed infrastructure, advanced transportation and communication networks, and a relatively high per capita income. Combined with the beautiful scenery of this garden city, Singapore attracts large numbers of tourists every year. And in order to ease the housing problems caused by urgent population growth, Singapore introduced the HDB flat policy. HDB flats were built with funding from Singapore's Housing and Development Board and then sold to citizens at subsidized prices. HDB flats are known for their good locations and affordable prices, which greatly alleviated the housing crisis. Over 80% of Singapore citizens live in HDB flats, and the protagonists of today's story lived in a government HDB flat. On the 5th floor of Block 58 on Yanglong Road, the Chen family of 6 lived. The husband, Chen Qingkai, was 36 years old, and his wife, Li Meiying, was 32. The couple ran a small school bus together. The husband drove while the wife worked as the fare collector. Every morning they would drive to pick up and drop off nearby children for school. The morning the incident happened seemed no different from any other. On Saturday, January 6, 1979, although it was the weekend, primary school students still had to go to school. At around 6:35 a.m., after finishing breakfast, the Chens kissed their 4 children, who were still asleep, and then, as usual, drove their minibus to pick up other children waiting to go to school. Although the law didn't permit parents to leave children home alone like this, as a dual-income family it was hard to balance work and childcare. Back then, many parents had no choice but to do this to earn a living. They would basically lock their children at home or have relatives and neighbors keep an eye on them. The Chen's 4 children were the eldest, 10-year-old Chen Guoping in 5th grade, the second child, 8-year-old Chen Guoxing in 2nd grade, the third child, 6-year-old Chen Guoshun in 1st grade, and the youngest, 5-year-old Zhen Nai. The 3 sons attended a nearby primary school, while Zhen Nai, as the youngest, had just been enrolled in kindergarten, her textbooks and school bag already bought, ready to start Monday. But 2 days before school began, tragedy struck. 35 minutes after leaving home, at 7:10 a.m., Chen Qingkai stopped the school bus by the roadside. As usual, Li Meiying called home to remind the children to wake up, but the phone rang for a long time with no answer. Though she found it odd, she didn't think much of it, assuming the children were sleeping in, and figured she'd just call again later. Over the next while, Chen Qingkai and Li Meiying tried calling home twice more at different times, but there was still no answer. Growing uneasy, Li Meiying called her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, and asked her to knock on the door, worried the children had overslept. Between 8:30 and 9:00 a.m., Mrs. Chen knocked loudly, but the apartment was completely silent. She tried looking through the window, but the curtains were drawn and she couldn't see inside. Back in 1979, nobody had mobile phones, so Mrs. Chen had no way to reach Li Meiying. She went home and then out to buy groceries, planning to pass the news along later. Meanwhile, on the bus, Li Meiying assumed a neighbor had simply woken the kids. So after the morning run, she and Chen Qingkai didn't check on the children early. Instead, as usual, they went on to shuttle nearby factory workers finishing their shifts. At 9:59 a.m., the couple got home. Li Meiying took out her keys and opened the front door, and the moment she stepped inside, she noticed the children's school bags were still on the living room table and their shoes untouched. Her heart sank. Walking through the kitchen to the bathroom, the sight before her nearly made her lose her mind. Her 4 children lay covered in countless stab wounds and blood, piled one on top of another. The scene looked like hell on earth. Both parents collapsed to the ground screaming. Neighbors who rushed over immediately helped call the police. After the report came in, the first officer arrived at 10:04 a.m. Upon seeing the scene, he quickly called for backup. Soon the Criminal Investigation Department, CID, dispatched a special task force, sending a large number of officers and detectives. One detective was Simon Subya, with 14 years of experience. By the time he arrived at Block 58, a crowd of onlookers had already packed the area. After police tape went up, Detective Subya went to the 5th floor. To understand the case, let's look at the flat's layout. Past the front door was the living and dining room, the most spacious area. Past the kitchen were the bathroom and bedroom at the back. Since there was only one bedroom, the couple slept on the bed while the 4 children slept on mats on the floor. At the scene, Detective Subya first noticed the front door and the outer metal gate. Neither showed signs of forced entry. Inside, items in the living and dining room were neatly arranged. The children's bags were still on the table, and a fish tank sat on a side table with 2 fish inside. Nothing looked disturbed or searched. But when he reached the bathroom and saw what had happened to the children, he was deeply shaken. The bodies of the 4 children were stacked one on top of another. The eldest, Guoping, was at the bottom, and the youngest, Zhen Nai, on top. Each child had been hacked so badly they were barely recognizable. Detective Subia later said this was, without question, the most horrific case of his career. At 11:40 a.m., 2 forensic pathologists, Ko Tsu Cheng and Wang Kum Po, arrived. Based on the wounds, they believed the killer had used 2 different knives. One resembled a chopper or kitchen knife. The eldest, Chen Guoping, suffered 25 to 26 wounds to the head, face, and torso. His right arm was nearly severed, held on by a small strip of flesh, and his left hand tightly clutched a lock of hair, suggesting he'd fought fiercely. The second child, 8-year-old Chen Guoxing, suffered over 20 wounds to the head, back of the head, and abdomen. The killer used considerable force. The child's throat was struck hard enough to be partially split open. The third child, 7-year-old Chen Guoshun, suffered over 20 wounds. The youngest, 5-year-old Zhen Nai, also suffered over 20 wounds, including extremely deep facial cuts. She was still clutching her small pillow when she died, suggesting she'd been forcibly woken and dragged into the bathroom. The forensic report showed each child had over 20 stab wounds, and even after they died, the attacker showed no sign of stopping. He continued hacking wildly at each child's body, suggesting the killer acted out of intense hatred. Examining the scene, police found blood traces in the kitchen sink, suggesting the killer washed up there afterward. An inventory showed nothing missing and no sign anything had been searched, indicating robbery wasn't the motive. However, a kitchen knife was missing. Combined with the children's wounds, police believed the killer had brought a weapon before entering, clearly planning the attack in advance. Passing through the kitchen, he also grabbed the kitchen knife. He dragged one child into the bathroom and locked the other 3 in the bedroom. After killing the first child, he repeated the process, dragging the second child in and leaving the rest of the children in the bedroom until he finally reached the youngest, Zhen Nai. Based on body stiffness and blood coagulation, pathologists estimated the killing happened just hours earlier, roughly 6:30 to 7:30 a.m., meaning the killer entered almost right after the couple left. Investigators believed he'd likely been hiding nearby and went in as soon as he saw the school bus leave. Combined with the fact that the door lock showed no forced entry, police suspected the killer was very likely someone the family knew. The children apparently had no suspicion and simply opened the door. The question is, among the Chen's acquaintances, who could have harbored such deep hatred toward them? To calm the crowd and reporters gathered below, police held a press conference at the scene. To avoid interfering with the investigation, they only briefly announced the deaths and released very few details. Most of what's known about the case actually came from journalists or family members at the time. For instance, one key piece of evidence, a lock of hair, was revealed by the children's grieving father, Chen Qingkai, to reporters 2 days later, on January 8th. Chen Qingkai said that on the morning of the incident, after getting the news, he and his family, arranged by police, went to identify the 4 children's bodies. At the time, he noticed 10-year-old Chen Guoping's left hand tightly clutching a lock of hair, about 4 to 5 inches, 10-12 cm long. Chen Qingkai believed this length clearly didn't match his son's own hair, so he thought it might belong to the killer. He believed his son had fought fiercely and in his final moments torn out a lock of the attacker's hair. There were also rumors that a neighbor on the 6th floor of the block across the way saw the youngest girl, Zhen Nai, run out of the bathroom during the incident, only to be dragged back in. The neighbor reportedly assumed it was just a disobedient child being disciplined and thought nothing of it. But strangely, even though police canvassed every neighbor and publicly appealed at the press conference for anyone with information to come forward, this neighbor was never found, nor was any eyewitness ever located. To this day, whether the Zhen Nai incident actually happened remains unconfirmed. Even more astonishing, in such a brutal case, 4 people murdered, each stabbed more than 20 times, not a single neighbor reported hearing any noise at all. After the case broke, a relative of the Chens told reporters that several police officers actually lived on the same 5th floor. In the past, they'd greet the Chen children when passing by, even play with them. No one expected such a tragedy. These officer neighbors were deeply saddened, some quietly shedding tears. To push the investigation forward, CID pulled together elite officers to form a special task force, led by then CID Director, Deputy Superintendent Yan Wenliang. The task force split into groups working simultaneously. First, they sent hair, fingerprints, blood samples, clothing, and other evidence for forensic testing. Then they brought the couple and over 100 neighbors to CID headquarters in batches for questioning. The most crucial step was interrogating Chen Qingkai and Li Meiying themselves. Detectives had them describe their schedule that day in detail, all sources of income and their social network, focusing on anyone they might have had disputes with, enemies, or jealousy over their minibus business. To CID, this clearly wasn't a simple robbery murder. Nothing was taken, so it wasn't about money but revenge. A detective not involved in the case told reporters he believed CID's assessment would match his own. This was a revenge killing, and the killer was almost certainly someone the family knew, someone who may have visited the home and known the children, which is why they let him in without hesitation. He also knew the couple's schedule inside and out, allowing him to time the attack so precisely and kill 4 people in such a short window. Under questioning, Chen Qingkai and Li Meiying said their family had always gotten along well with relatives, friends, and neighbors, had never offended anyone, and couldn't imagine who would do this. Chen Qingkai said they'd left very early that morning to get a head start driving passengers, and in their rush forgot to lock the outer gate. He also suspected the killer might have had a key, since they'd lost one before but never changed the lock. Chen Qingkai's account of the lost key matched another lead police already had. A neighbor surnamed NG told detectives that Li Meiying had mentioned losing her house key about a month before the incident. Afterward, too busy or not wanting the hassle, she and her husband never changed the lock. If the killer really had gotten hold of the key, that would explain why the lock wasn't forced. Li Meiying told detectives that when she left that morning, the children were sleeping soundly on the floor. Seeing her youngest, Zhen Nai, squeezed in among her brothers, she felt a pang of tenderness and picked her up to place her on the bed instead. In tears, Li Meiying said the children had all been sleeping so peacefully and sweetly. The day after the incident, January 7th, police brought 2 female neighbors back to CID headquarters for questioning. Both women in their 30s or 40s were members of a rotating savings group that had had financial disputes with the Chen family. It turned out the children's mother, Li Meiying, had started what's called a hui, a type of informal, small-scale lending group fairly common in that era. Originating from the Minnan region, this kind of savings group was once popular across Hong Kong and Southeast Asia. It ran entirely on trust between members, making it quite risky by today's standards. It would be considered illegal informal financing, banned in most countries. The organizer is typically called the Hui Tu, the group head, which was Li Meiying's role. The other participants were called members. There were rumors that one of the 2 women had defaulted on over $1,000 and the other on over $3,000. As group head, Li Meiying had negotiated with both women multiple times. Though they kept verbally promising to repay, they stalled, and the debts still weren't repaid by the time of the incident. Someone also told police that one of the 2 women brought in had once had a heated argument with Li Meiying for unknown reasons. So could this woman, harboring deep resentment over money, have sent someone after the children out of revenge? In reality, Singapore police didn't release many details, especially about witness testimony. But that didn't stop newspaper reporters, who staked out locations including outside CID headquarters and near the crime scene, whenever they spotted the Chen couple or anyone just out of a police interview. They'd rush over to interview them. Thanks to this, newspaper coverage from that era still gives us a lot of insight into the case. As for whether what interviewees told reporters matched what they told detectives, or whether there was exaggeration, that's hard to say. Feel free to judge for yourself after hearing everything. According to newspaper reports from around the time of the 1979 incident, one woman summoned by police, surnamed Sue, lived directly across from the crime scene. CID detectives asked whether she'd heard strange noises or seen anyone suspicious entering or leaving. She said no. When reporters asked her about the savings group, Ms. Sue didn't respond. Another woman summoned by police, surnamed Fock, spoke to reporters on January 11th, 5 days after the incident. She said she'd moved into the block 3 years earlier with her husband, had 3 children, and lived on the 7th floor. She'd often run into Li Meiying at the stairwell, and after a few conversations, Li Meiying, as group head, invited her to join. Shares initially cost $20 each, recently rising to $30. The two families were quite close, and the children often played together. She told reporters that on the morning of January 6th, around 6:30 a.m., she took one of her children down the elevator. Downstairs, she watched her child board the minibus, then returned to her flat. It wasn't until around 10:30 a.m. that she heard a commotion outside. When she opened her door, she learned the 4 Chen children downstairs had been killed. During those hours, Ms. Fox said she hadn't heard any screaming or crying at all. The day after, January 7th, starting from 8 a.m., CID brought her and her husband in for questioning. But once there, she found dozens of others also waiting. They waited until 6 p.m. before it ended. She told reporters the questions mainly focused on Chen Qingkai and Li Meiying's relationships and her own involvement in the savings group dispute. Ms. Fox admitted she had a gambling habit and did owe money, but only just over $100, nowhere near the rumored $1,000 plus. This debt had actually been fronted for her by Li Meiying. When asked about the rumored argument, she admitted they'd had a big fight before the incident, over her being unable to repay the debt while Li Meiying kept pressing her, which made her lose her temper. But she said they'd already made up and there were no hard feelings. Notably, aside from the savings group questions, Ms. Fox said CID also asked an oddly specific question: whether she'd seen a charcoal seller doing business in the area that day. She said no, which made her think police suspected this charcoal seller might be significantly connected to the case. In the following days, police thoroughly interviewed over 100 neighbors, questioning nearly everyone in the block. One neighbor surnamed Chen said that 5 days before the incident, someone knocked on her door, claimed he had the wrong flat, and quickly left. It's unclear if this man was connected to the case. A woman in her 60s told reporters she usually spent her days chatting with passing neighbors in the corridor and would notice any stranger. But that morning, around 8 a.m., she happened to be washing her hair and saw no one suspicious. Another fifth-floor neighbor, Mrs. Chen Hujiao, told reporters that 5 days earlier, on New Year's Day, January 1st, a strange man had knocked on her door around 5 p.m. Her young son rushed to answer, but just as he was about to open the outer gate, she stopped him. She noticed a strange young man lurking by the door, acting furtively, and asked through the gate what he wanted. He held up 2 bottles he was carrying and in a flat, blank tone, said someone downstairs had told him to come up. Mrs. Chen asked who exactly had sent him, but before she could finish the question, he turned and quickly walked away. She wasn't sure whether he was connected to the murders, but reported this lied to police anyway. Another neighbor, Ms. Ng, said she wasn't especially close with the Chens. The family of 6 had previously lived elsewhere and only moved into this block 4 to 5 years earlier. Chen Qingkai used to work as a delivery driver, while Li Meiying worked in a garment factory. They'd married for love. Ms. Ng said the couple occasionally argued, but never over affairs or money. Mainly about the kids. With so many children, when they got mischievous, Li Meiying would scold or spank them, while Chen Qingkai tended to be more protective, leading to occasional disagreements. Overall, though, they were very loving toward each other and deeply cared for their children. Ms. Ng described Li Meiying as having a bold, outgoing personality. 2 weeks before the incident, a neighbor had given her over $100 to pay a utility bill along with her own. But Li Meiying left the money on her table and later couldn't find it. She ended up paying the neighbor's bill out of her own pocket. In Ms. Ng's view, Li Meiying was warm and generous, nothing like someone who'd provoke deep hatred. She couldn't imagine who'd hold such a grudge. Another neighbor, who declined to give her name, said that months before the incident, the Chen home had been broken into. A man had claimed to be a utility board employee there to check the water and electricity. The couple wasn't home, only this neighbor's child and the 4 Chen children were inside. After the children opened the door, the fake inspector asked where the family kept their wallets. When they said they didn't know, he began ransacking the flat, even trying to pry open drawers. The neighbor said her child ran home immediately and told her what happened. By the time she rushed over, the suspicious man had already fled. The most valuable lead police received came 8 days later, on January 14th. That day, a taxi driver reported that he believed he'd picked up the killer that morning. Around 8 a.m., while driving past Block 96 on Yonglong Road, he picked up a suspicious young man in his 20s. The man's left side had bloodstains and he seemed frantic. During the ride, he kept leaning against the door, breathing heavily. The driver said he casually asked why he had so much blood on him, and the man replied he'd been beaten up. When the car reached Lavender Street, he asked to get out, and as he did, the driver heard a thud. Looking back, he saw a knife poking out from the man's waistband. Based on his accent and appearance, the driver believed he was from Malaysia. To verify this, police had him pick the man out of a lineup. The man he chose shocked the children's father, Chen Kinkai. He actually knew him. This young Malaysian man lived with his sister on the same 5th floor, just a few flats away. Chen Kinkai said he often came over to answer the phone and over time had grown familiar with the children, who called him uncle. Otherwise, the family had no particular connection to him. After 2 weeks of investigation with no concrete evidence, police had to release him. Not long after, he and his sister moved out and returned to Malaysia, and the case went cold again. So could this young man really have been the killer? Many believe so. The reasoning: the driver said the man boarded at Block 96, only about 350 meters, a 5-minute walk from Block 58. The pickup time, around 8 a.m., fits the timeline of a fleeing killer. Also, the victim's eldest son, Guoping, had his right arm repeatedly hacked and nearly severed, meaning the killer must have been facing him directly, so blood from his arm would likely have sprayed onto the killer's left side, and this man's left side was indeed bloodied, matching the driver's description exactly. The driver had no reason to lie since he gained nothing, and he'd picked this man from a lineup of several suspects. Doesn't this all but prove he was the killer? At first glance, it seems police let the real killer go. But other commenters argue that, on closer thought, there are many holes in this theory. First, Chen Kinkai himself said his family was quite familiar with the young man, contradicting any claim of no connection. As a taxi driver, he'd surely have known about major local news, since most drivers listen to the radio all day. Even without the radio, wall-to-wall TV and newspaper coverage should have reached him almost immediately. So why did he wait until January 14th, 8 days later, to report it, instead of the day after or the day after that? If he was too scared to come forward right away, waiting a few extra days wouldn't have changed anything, would it? There's another point that doesn't add up. The young man lived on the exact same floor as the Chens. If he really was the killer, he could easily have slipped back to his own flat when the corridor was empty to change out of his bloody clothes and dispose of the weapon. Why instead risk being seen, running downstairs in broad daylight, still in blood-stained clothes and carrying the knife, walking 5 minutes to Block 96 to catch a taxi? It's as if he wanted people to notice the blood on him. A week after the incident, on January 13th, the Sin Ming Daily ran a front-page headline claiming police had identified the killer. Reportedly, a young man connected to one of Li Meiying's savings group members, and alleged the murder was linked to a 4D lottery ticket and money owed to Chen Kinkai. 4D is a Singapore lottery called Wanzi, 10,000 digits, because bettors choose a 4-digit number from 0 to 9999. The newspaper reported with apparent certainty that Chen Kinkai had once won a 4D prize worth $40,000 to $50,000. 40 or 50,000 Singapore dollars might not sound like much today, but this was 1979. That year, Singapore's average annual salary was around $3,990. Just $332 a month, so you can imagine what a substantial sum this would have been. But according to the newspaper, the winner had entrusted a woman to place the bet on his behalf. When he went to collect the winnings, she claimed she'd forgotten to place the bet. He later learned the prize had already been claimed by someone else. Seeing her buy a minibus with new money afterward deepened his suspicion. He became convinced she'd stolen his winnings and, out of resentment, went after her children. Though the story sounded detailed and plausible, by January 18th the killer was still at large. Newspapers then claimed an arrest was imminent, reporting that one person questioned by CID had been injured and was undergoing treatment, implying he was the killer. As rumors grew wilder and even newspapers began fabricating details, police had to step in and deny the reports, stating the investigation was ongoing and that claims of an imminent arrest or that the killer had been identified were pure rumor. 2 weeks after the incident, Chen Kinkai received a greeting card. The front showed children happily playing, but the contents inside were chilling. The writer addressed the couple by their nicknames, Ah Kai and Ah Ying, writing that they had now lost their entire family line, followed by mocking laughter. The card was signed chillingly as the killer. The couple nearly collapsed in grief reading it. The comment about losing their family line had a specific meaning. After their youngest, Zhen Nai, was born, Meiying had discussed with her husband that 4 children were enough and she underwent sterilization surgery. The question was, how did the killer know about the surgery? And using their nicknames further convinced police that the killer had to be someone close to the couple. Notably, if the postcard's date is accurate, it also suggests the young Malaysian man wasn't the killer, since the driver reported him 8 days after the incident, and police detained and questioned him for 2 weeks straight. That means he wouldn't have been released until around 3 weeks after the incident. But the card was postmarked in the 2nd week, so unless he had a double or had someone write it for him, there's a clear timeline conflict. Police also certainly checked the handwriting against everyone involved, but found no match. A Sin Ming Daily reporter once asked the couple whether they'd had conflicts with anyone before the incident. They shook their heads sorrowfully and said, "Absolutely not," and revealed they'd been questioned repeatedly by CID day after day, the tedious interviews sometimes even making them lose their tempers, yet no leads ever turned up. They denied hiding anything, saying that with their children dead so horrifically, they understood. They'd already said everything there was to say. Although the couple insisted they had no enemies, witnesses reportedly saw at least 2 relatives repeatedly pressing the father, Chen Qingkai, asking why he hadn't reported something to police sooner. The report the relatives referred to clearly wasn't about the murders, but some earlier matter. So what happened that kept Chen Qingkai from reporting it sooner? When reporters tried to follow up with the family's relatives, not one was willing to confirm anything. They all claimed to know nothing. After the incident, the couple didn't move away immediately, continuing to run the school bus and live in their now empty flat. Neighbors reportedly saw them eating in silence through the windows, always setting out 4 extra sets of bowls and food, a heartbreaking sight. Not long after, unable to bear it any longer, they sold the school bus business they'd run for years, likely because seeing schoolchildren aboard kept reminding them of their own, often leaving them in tears together. After giving up the bus, they went to work in a factory. After some hard years, they started a small plastics business. There were also reports they'd tried to adopt a son and daughter but couldn't find a suitable match at the time. Hoping to rebuild their family, Meiying went to the hospital 4 years after the incident to try to reverse her sterilization. Perhaps by some stroke of fortune, she became pregnant. On October 30, 1983, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. After that, the family of 3 gradually faded from public view. Today, 46 years after the incident, the case remains unsolved, standing as one of Singapore's most notorious cold cases. Over the decades, all kinds of rumors and speculation have persisted. Some suspect it was related to an affair, that the killer might have been Meiying's lover, wanting her to leave her family and start a new one with him, and upon learning she'd been sterilized, felt betrayed and, in a fit of madness, murdered her children. But the most widespread theory is that Chen Qingkai and Meiying almost certainly knew who the killer was. The reasoning, the killer must have been very close to them, otherwise, how would he have known about the sterilization? And with hatred this deep, how could they not have some idea who was responsible? The theory holds they knew but were too afraid to say for some reason. What could have kept them silent? The most plausible explanation is that they'd committed some serious crime themselves, one potentially punishable by death. Singapore is famous for its harsh penalties, and among death penalty crimes that could apply to the couple, there seems to be only one real possibility: drugs. If the killer had somehow learned the couple was involved with drugs, everything would make sense. They hated him deeply but couldn't speak up, since if police discovered their involvement, they themselves could have faced execution. Although rumors claim police found no fingerprints or blood traces from the killer at the scene, after reviewing every article from Singapore's 3 newspapers in January 1979, I found no reports of police disclosing physical evidence, only mentions that blood samples and other evidence were collected for testing, with no follow-up. Notably, Singapore didn't have DNA technology until 1990, 11 years after the incident. DNA technology was primitive at the time, and any DNA on the evidence would have degraded over the years. Whether anything can still be extracted, or whether future DNA advances could crack this cold case remains unknown. But regarding the lock of hair found in 10-year-old Chen Guoping's hand 5 days later on January 11th, renowned forensic pathologist Ko Tsu Cheng personally examined it. The results showed the hair actually belonged to the boy himself, not the killer. But this raised a new question. If it was his own hair, how did it end up in his hand? Why would he have grabbed his own hair? Or perhaps the killer pulled it out and placed it there himself. After the 4 innocent children were killed, people continued leaving tributes at their graves, flowers, and popular toys of the era. But alongside this touching outpouring, some visitors weren't quite so innocent in their motives, since media outlets had reported the case might be linked to a 4D lottery win, drawing gamblers who came to pay their respects. No one knows whether these visitors genuinely thought of the children or had ulterior motives, but they clung to the rumor that the family had won a 4D prize, believing that by paying tribute, they too might one day get lucky. This case has left behind far too many unanswered questions, but those directly involved no longer wish to revisit it. Perhaps for them, everything has long since settled into the past, and the memories are simply too painful to look back on. 42 years after the incident, in 2021, a Singapore nonprofit called Crime Library revisited the case, hoping to raise public awareness and encourage anyone with information to finally come forward. The campaign drew considerable attention, and one former neighbor from the block came forward, willing to share 3 pieces of information. First, some newspapers at the time reported the incident happened on the 14th floor, but it actually happened on the 5th. Second, the children's mother, Meiying, wasn't actually a Singapore native. Third, Meiying wasn't her real name was Lee MC. Although these details might not seem directly useful to the case, the willingness to speak up is a valuable attitude in itself. It's hoped more people with knowledge will come forward and contact police. A detail you might dismiss as unimportant could turn out to be the key clue that finally cracks the case. In 2021, a Sin Ming Daily reporter visited Lee Meiying after all these years and told her the case was once again drawing public attention. By then, she was in her 70s, living with her grandson. She told the reporter her husband, Chen Qingkai, had passed away years earlier, sadly, before the case was ever solved. In a notable moment, when asked whether she still hoped it would be solved, she paused for a long time, her eyes welling with tears, and then gave a reply that carried a deeper meaning. Just leave it all to the police. Some who heard this felt Lee Meiying had finally made peace with the past, while others felt it actually suggested she already knew who the killer was, since most people under normal circumstances would say they'd never stop searching. So what do you make of her response and of this mind-bending unsolved case? Who do you think the killer really is, and why did he murder these 4 children? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. As always, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next time.